Annie Alexander.
Are you here to meet Miss Alexander? Oh, what's that? Oh dear, I hear she won't be coming. They say she was called away on an emergency expedition. She won't return for several weeks. Oh, well, I suppose there's nothing left for us to do but to each go our separate way for the evening. So, farewell, everyone. Damn it. Well, you found me out. I am Annie Alexander. Forgive me. It isn't that I don't wish to speak with you. I just don't wish to speak with you about myself. I've heard what people say about me, that I laid the foundation for education, conservation, and research programs that would go on to pave the way for modern-day American museums. Blah, blah, blah. When will these people come to understand? I'm not the important one here. Yes, I did fund and design two of the most successful museums on the West Coast, the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology and the Museum of Paleontology. And yes, funds are still contributed to them annually from my estate. And yes, I do despise publicity with every fiber of my being. Until my dying day, I requested that all my donations be placed on the books as a gift from a friend of the university. Like I said, I'm not the one that's important here. It's the specimens themselves that are of value. Very well. I understand that you are here at the behest of a museum. For its sake, and for the sake of the scientific knowledge that I will inevitably impart to you, I will tell you my story. Born in Honolulu in 1867, right here at the Mission House, I grew up on Maui, on the slopes of Haiku, with my father and my family. My father, Samuel Thomas Alexander, was the greatest man I have ever known. It was from this robust and adventurous fellow that I would inherit a love for collecting specimens in nature and asking questions about them. What were they called? Where did they come from? And how did they fit into the bigger picture? There was a curious fascination in both of us for beginning a project where the chances for success were but the very slightest. It was with this reckless fascination that Papa created Alexander and Baldwin Incorporated, a sugar company that would eventually go on to join the ranks of the Big Five, the island's most successful sugar businesses. Ever my father's daughter, I sought to prove to him that I could run a thrifty business too. So when Papa's business partner, Henry Baldwin, offered to pay me 25 cents for each avocado seedling I could gather, I set to the task with unmatched tenacity. He was shocked when I returned with an ox cart full of seedlings and a bill for $75. I was a tomboy with a penchant for rambling through the woods and gulches, looking for land shells and ferns. On those clear nights, when half the universe shone down upon us, we built fires on the slopes of the mountain and stood in the smoke until our clothes were covered in soot. People naturally take it as a blessing to have a roof over their heads at night. But how oppressive that roof seems after time spent in nature. As I grew older, I accompanied Papa on all of his adventures. We hunted and collected flowers, watched birds, and photographed mammals. Things changed dramatically, however, when Papa took ill. On the advice of his doctors, we picked up and moved to a drier climate. Oakland, California. Quite possibly the dullest place on the face of the earth. Mother and my friends encouraged me to combat my melancholy by finding a husband and settling down. I quickly put an end to their efforts for the sake of the local menfolk. If I had not, I surmised there would have been a good many headless bodies and battered frames laying about Oakland streets. It was a strange discovery that led me to pull the old man in the sea from my back and sling him away from me. I began attending lectures at the University of California, Berkeley. My range of interest was wide, but nothing captured my imagination like the study of paleontology. I fell in love with tales of the saber-toothed tiger whose fangs dripped with the blood of oreodonts and three-toed horses in a world far older than the peaks and valleys of my native Hawaii. It was during those early, delicate days, racked with self-doubt and intellectual frustration, that paleontology became my first and my lifelong passion. What a fever the study of old Earth had set up in me. Armed with my new and valued companions, the pick and collecting sack, I set to work. Now, in the days of ancient Greek heroes, success was achieved by brute force and occasional help from the gods. That wasn't fair. They don't deserve half their fame. Pure grit, pluck, dogged perseverance, whatever you may call it, was what achieved wonders in the field. Still, my finds were always woefully incomplete. But perhaps that was what interested me so. There was so much yet to discover. I attempted to fill in the gaps in the story of these strange, extinct gods by examining their closest living relations. My bourgeoising interest in modern osteology, the study of bones, led me first to acquire some dog skulls. My adventures connected with that first quest are too revolting to relate. Suffice it to say, I made 2 trips to the pound and bought a new clothes boiler at Mama's request. Before long, I was collecting specimens of every shape and kind, birds, reptiles, mammals, and the more I discovered, the more I longed to discover. Of course, Papa was supportive of my new interests and aided me wherever he could. It was this support that led us into the heart of another world. In 1904, my father and I set out on an 800-mile trek by foot through the wilds of Africa. It was to be the opportunity of a lifetime. The purpose of our journey was to collect wildlife, both on film and as trophies. I captured countless photographs of sure-footed zebras, numbering in the hundreds, and families of giraffes that walked about single file through the forest like so many ships, and a wild people who went about dressed in skins. I flourished in the heat. In fact, I had never been in better health. I had become a woman of blood, enamored by firearms and the chase. Papa joked that if he or his arms bearer were unable to handle a lion, I would simply seize the beast by the tail and throw it 20 feet away from us. As our journey neared its end, Papa began expressing feelings of a foreboding disaster. I laughed at his unfounded fears. Nothing could ever stop a man of his grit and will. Ignoring his premonitions, we forged ahead, and before long, we found ourselves standing in the chasm where water gushes from Victoria Falls. So entranced were we by the sight that we failed to notice loose rocks tumbling down the precipice towards us. Hearing a sharp noise, I turned to see a boulder hurtling down the face of the cliff, and before I could cry out, it struck Papa in the leg, crushing his left foot. I dragged Papa up the face of the cliff, cringing at his agonized cries. By the time we reached the residence of the local doctor, he had lost a great deal of blood. His hip was mangled, his leg fractured, and his foot utterly crushed. The doctor counseled emergency amputation, but even such extreme measures proved futile. Papa passed away September 10th, 1904. I buried him in a small cemetery in Livingston, Zambia. An eternity resting beneath the African sun does not seem so terrible. Death is always so much harder on the living. I felt so terribly alone. I knew him so well. He had been so much alive. I knew every shape of his face, every curve, and every tone in his voice. But he was gone. And all I could do was move on. I had to find some way to divert my mind and absorb my interests. Papa and I had shared collecting and a fascination with nature, so it seemed only fitting that I should use the money he left me to preserve that which would otherwise be lost. In our many adventures together, we had observed the frightening speed with which birds and mammals were disappearing from the West Coast. It occurred to me there was no museum dedicated solely to collection and research of these specimens. So in 1907, I wrote to the University of California, Berkeley, the birthplace of my lust for collecting, and proposed the founding of a museum dedicated to research of the flora and fauna of the West Coast. I offered to provide capital for construction of the building, salaries for all the staff, and funding for all field expeditions. To my delight, they agreed. Now, I've always considered the director to be the heart of an institution, and I was lucky enough to find the perfect man to take hold, Joseph Grinnell. Joseph was a young naturalist who would go on to become one of the leading evolutionary theorists of his time. The two of us worked together and built the museum from the ground up. I insisted that the two of us have complete control over the museum. Together, we designed its every detail, from the ink used in writing the catalog cards to its name, the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology. Our new alliance strengthened us both. Grinnell was a man of analysis, content to sit locked away in a room for weeks, working up results, loath to get his hands dirty in the field, while I was never happy when my hands got too clean. Our relationship resembled that of a traditional marriage. I supplied the sustenance, and he ruled the domicile. With plans for construction of the museum underway, the next step was to create its collection. A series of trips to Alaska and the surrounding islands would provide its nucleus. I decided to take a lady with me on one of these adventures, a young teacher from Oakland. The woman was a recent acquaintance of mine who wished to learn how to put up specimens and take notes. To my surprise and delight, she took to field work like a fish to water. I never dreamed that her inclusion on this trip would change my life. The woman's name was Louise Kellogg, and I contend that she was the most important discovery of the trip. She rarely left my side for the next 40 years. Now, Louise and I couldn't make up our minds to return to plain life in Oakland with so many new specimens to collect, luring us on, and all the fascination that this sort of gypsy lifestyle had for us. Collecting gave us purpose. Rarely did a year go by when we did not embark on some new expedition into the wild. When our joy for collecting fossils began to wane, we sought out birds and then mammals, and before long, even plant specimens. Every drop of blood within me was for this outdoor life. Digging in heat so blistering that we were forced to parade about in nothing but our shoes and stockings, prying frozen animals from traps with screwdrivers, and feeling such hunger that even large kangaroo rat tasted as good as chicken. When something captured our imagination, there was no stopping us. In total, we contributed over 34,000 fossil plant and animal specimens to the Berkeley campus museums via these trips. You may ask what my objective was in making such painstaking collections. When approached with investment ideas, I would point to the research room filled with students and say, here are my investments. These young people are missionaries of science who would go to carry on the museum's philosophy long after my time had come to an end. I can think of no investment that is more promising. It's strange how absorbing field work is. One forgets about the outside world. I was walking along one day with a light step, feeling young and happy, when the wind blew a wisp of white hair in front of my eyes. I had no problem recognizing the arrival of age in a paleontological specimen, but I could not see it in myself. I celebrated my 80th birthday camping among the oaks and pines. I consider one's twilight years to be a very appropriate period to do field work. Better to wear out than rust out, I always said. On November 11th, 1949, I suffered a stroke and lapsed into a coma that would last for 10 months. All the while, Louise continued to write in my diary. Her final entry, dated September 10th, 1950, read simply, "Fini." It was my time. I had lived my life in my own way, without being dependent on others, and I was happy. As Goethe once said, "Remain not fixed and rooted. Bravely venture, briskly roam." I am glad you changed my mind and persuaded me to stay and talk with you. But I must leave you now. There is work to be done. I have never heard it said that any branch of science could be exhausted. And so, as Louise and I used to sing, I'll away to the fossil land. Good night.